Hey Stat Rollers, Bill with Roll Stats. Today we're diving into one of my all-time favorite classic D&D modules. If we're talking about the TSR B-Series, this one is easily at the top of my list. We're talking about Dungeon Module B4, The Lost City, written by Tom Moldvay and published in 1982 by TSR. And here's the thing, this isn't just a fun dungeon crawl, it's a sandbox that rewards player ingenuity, survival instincts, and above all else, role-playing, right? It's really a proto-mega dungeon before that was even a thing, and it still holds up today as really one of the most unique and versatile classic adventures TSR ever published. So in this retrospective and review, I'll go deep into the history, the legacy, and the lore of the Lost City, and I'll offer my tips for running it along the way and discuss whether this module still holds up today, whether it's still worth running. But before we go any further, this is your spoiler warning. I'll be talking about all of the details of Dungeon Module B4 The Lost City in this video. So if you want to experience it firsthand, maybe send your DM this way instead and, come back after your first playthrough. Alright, if you're still here, buckle up because we're about to take a deep dive into the sands of Cynidicea. Oh, I love this module so much. This is absolutely my favorite Tom Moldvay module ever. So back in 1982, TSR was, in its golden age, cranking out modules at a breakneck pace. The B-Series, those introductory adventure modules for basic D&D, were designed to teach new players and DMs how to play and, run the game. But before The Lost City, it was a bit different. Yes, it was an introductory module. Yes, it did teach DMs how to run and players how to play. But most B-Series modules were straightforward dungeon crawls. Go in, kill the monsters, take the treasure. But Tom Moldvay had other plans. Instead of a self-contained adventure, he gave us a framework, a sand-covered skeleton of a world, right? Waiting for the DM to flesh it out. The module itself wasn't just a dungeon. It was an entire lost civilization crumbling under the weight of its own decay, its own madness, and ancient horrors. And what's fascinating is that Moldvay left it unfinished on purpose, right? He gives DMs suggestions on how to expand the adventure, but really the deeper layers of Cynidicea, that's all on you. And that's why B4 The Lost City is still one of the most beloved OSR modules today, right? Like, you can see its influence in everything from the Dark Sun to Isle of Dread to Forbidden Lands, proving that sandbox play, survival, and faction intrigue are just as compelling, if not more so, than, just your standard dungeon crawl. For anyone unfamiliar, The Lost City is a module designed for characters between levels 1 to 3. It was originally intended for use with the Dungeons & Dragons basic set, the 1981 basic set, the Moldvay revision, the pink box. However, since its release, The Lost City has been partially reprinted in B1 through 9 in Search of Adventure in 1987. And more recently, in Goodman Games' Original Adventures Reincarnated series for 5e. And if you look at modern OSR works, you can see its fingerprints everywhere. Unlike many of its contemporaries, it introduces a fascinating, ruined civilization buried beneath the sands, providing a deeply atmospheric setting that goes far beyond just hacking goblins and orcs to pieces in some random dungeon corridor, right? So I've run The Lost City multiple times, and each campaign always takes on a life of its own. It really does. It's really a module that rewards creativity and long-term campaign play, offering opportunities for faction intrigue, survival-based challenges, and world building on a much grander scale than can be found in most modules, right? But what really makes The Lost City shine isn't just its history, it's the story and the lore at its heart. So let's take a look at that. So every great civilization has its moment of collapse, its turning point when everything that once stood strong begins to crumble. The Fall of Cynidecia is one of those stories. It's a mix of hubris, horror, and slow creeping corruption that really makes the Lost City such a compelling and unique module. The backstory of Cynidicea sets the stage for a city that is far more than just another dungeon to loot. It's a once great kingdom that fell into madness, a society that turned its back on reason and embraced something far, far darker. And as a DM, this background isn't just flavor, it's the fuel that powers the entire adventure. Your players are stepping into the ruins of a culture that has been warped beyond recognition. And whether they realize it or not, right, they're about to become a part of that story. They're about to play a huge part in that story. And, every great kingdom has a fall, but few are as hauntingly tragic as Cynidicea. So imagine a powerful desert kingdom, one that had mastered the sands, building a thriving oasis where no one else could survive. So King Alexander, the last of Cynidicia's great rulers, led his people into an age of prosperity. They built irrigation systems, they reclaimed the desert, and they constructed a colossal step pyramid in his honor. But then, much like the dwarves, they dug too deep. At the heart of the pyramid, workers uncovered something terrible. A being named Zargon. But he's not just any being, right? Zargon is essentially an evil god. He isn't just a monster. He's an eldritch abomination, a being that can't be killed, at least not by any means known to the Cynidicians. When they tried to fight him, they failed. Their weapons simply shattered and their magic fizzled. There was no way to kill this beast. So, they did really the unthinkable. They started feeding him sacrifices. And, so first it was criminals, right? No harm, no foul. Then it was political rivals. Then it was whoever the ruling class just wanted gone. And over time, what started as desperation became worship of Zargon. At some point, something shifted. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was something far more insidious, but over time, the people of Cynidicea stopped viewing Zargon as a threat, and they saw him as a god. It starts as a fringe belief, but as more and more Cynidicians bought into the idea of Zargon as a god, their old faiths of the kingdom just withered, right? The temples of Gorm, Usamigaras, and Madarua were abandoned. The city's traditions eroded. Their laws became more brutal. And then, as usually happens, the city just fell into full-blown decadence. With Zargon's hunger at the center of their society, the Cynidicians lost all sense of responsibility. Their army dissolved. The once great irrigation systems, they just collapsed. Farmers abandoned their fields. The people turned to strange hallucinogenic drugs and mindless revelry, retreating from reality into like a dreamlike existence. And meanwhile, the desert reclaimed the land. Without irrigation, Cynidicia's fertile lands just dried up, and what had once been an oasis became nothing more than another stretch of endless sand. The outside world, watching the kingdom rot from within, simply abandoned it. The kingdom collapsed overnight. Think total apocalypse. Only those who fled underground survived. Only those who fled into the pyramid and under survived. But, the survivors of Cynidicea, they weren't really warriors or rulers. They were dreamers and cultists, people who had long since abandoned the rational world. So they gathered in the catacombs beneath the pyramid, rebuilding a strange version of their fallen city, under the earth. And at first, they might seem like a standard group of subterranean dwellers, right? Pale-skinned, white-haired, adapted to the darkness. But every Cynidician wears an ornate mask, shaped like an animal or human face, decorated with beads, bones, and jewels. And some of them paint their bodies in wild colors, and others just wander the tunnels, lost in drug-induced dreams. Think of it as like a a nightmarish hippie commune, right? Like, they are people living in a permanent fantasy, slowly wasting away with each generation. To them, the pyramid, the catacombs, the underground city, that's all that exists. And yet, some Cynidicians still remember what once was. Not all Cynidicians have surrendered to madness. A handful have held on to the old ways, forming 3 distinct factions, each trying in their own way to restore the lost greatness of their people. Number 1, the Brotherhood of Gorm. So the Brotherhood of Gorm is the most rigid of the factions. They are militaristic, fanatical about law and order, and completely devoted to Gorm, the god of war, justice, and storms. They wear these golden masks of Gorm, depicting a stern-faced warrior with a long beard, and they dress in blue tunics and chainmail. And, their weapons are just kept in immaculate condition. They are truly law and order, right? To them, the fall of Cynidecia was caused by moral decay and lawlessness. They believe in strict discipline, and they will only accept new recruits if they swear absolute loyalty. They'll accept nothing less from, your party if they choose to join the Brotherhood of Gorm. And honestly, the Brotherhood of Gorm is the best faction if your players want strong armored allies who focus on, direct combat. But they're harsh, they're unbending, and their leadership expects absolute obedience and will accept nothing less. So if your players oppose them, those players are going to be treated as lawless criminals, and they're going to be dealt with accordingly. And remember, the laws in Cynidicea are brutal. Next up, the second faction, the Magi of Usamigaras, right? So the Magi are a completely different breed. They follow Usamigaras, the god of magic, messengers, and thieves. Unlike the stern and lawful Brotherhood, the Magi they're mysterious, they're secretive, and above all, they're deceptive, right? They wear these silver masks of a laughing child, and their robes are brightly colored and adorned with stars and symbols. They're masters of illusion and misdirection, and they believe the key to restoring Cynidicea lies in, arcane knowledge and honestly, cunning strategy, right? The Magi will test the player's intelligence and really adaptability before offering membership. So if your players are brash or violent or just, too trusting, right? The Magi are going to manipulate them for their own ends. Unlike the Brotherhood, the Magi don't want to rule Cynidicea with an iron fist. They want to rebuild Cynidicea through knowledge, magic, and subterfuge, right? And make no mistake, they want power, right? They absolutely want to rule Cynidicea, just not with an iron fist. But are they trustworthy? No. Well, not entirely. If the players work with the Magi, they'll gain access to powerful magic, for sure, but they're also going to find themselves playing a dangerous game of, politics and deception. Think Game of Thrones, right? And then finally, the third faction are the Warrior Maidens of Madarua, right? The Warrior Maidens of Madarua are a bit different. They're basically a middle ground between the extremes, so their beliefs lie somewhere between the extremes of the Brotherhood and the Magi, right? They worship Madarua, the goddess of life, death, and the changing seasons. And their goal is balance. They want to rebuild Cynidicea, but they don't want to do it through tyranny or manipulation, right? So I guess if there were any true good guys, it would be the Warrior Maidens of Madarua. They're strong fighters. They dress in green tunics and bronze masks depicting a noble warrior woman, right? They're skilled survivalists, and unlike the Brotherhood and the Magi, they don't expect absolute obedience or secrecy. But they do have one major rule. Only women can become full-fledged members. So men can be allies of the Warrior Maidens, but they can't lead. They can't be full-fledged members. This makes them really the most egalitarian of the factions, but also the hardest to fully join for a typical adventuring party. So if the players side with the Warrior Maidens, they'll gain access to strong warriors and survivalists, but it'll take a while to earn their trust. It's going to take time. So these factions, this political intrigue is one of the things that makes B4 so great. It makes it my favorite module of all time. It's where things get really interesting because these three factions, they absolutely despise each other, right? Like, if the players join one faction, they're expected to oppose the other factions. But, players being players, they can, and trust me, they will also play all sides against each other, right? Forming temporary alliances, gathering information, or, even uniting the factions to try to overthrow the Priests of Zargon. And because that's where the real horror is, right? The real horror begins with the Priests of Zargon. The Priests of Zargon are the true enemy, even though these three factions fight against each other. The true enemy is really the Priests of Zargon. While the factions squabble over the ruins, the real power in the Lost City, it actually lies further deep beneath the pyramid. The Priests of Zargon rule over the drugged out, masked Cynidicians, right? Keeping them trapped in a dreamlike haze, feeding them false visions and rituals, all while worshiping their monstrous god, Zargon. See, Zargon isn't just a monster. He is an ancient eldritch horror, a slithering, tentacled, lizard-headed abomination. Zargon is older than Cynidicea itself. He can't be killed by normal means, and the priests revere him, and they offer him living sacrifices, ensuring that, his hunger is always fed. If your players descend far enough, they will come face to face with the nightmare at the heart of the Lost City. And, they're gonna have to decide, right? Your players will have to decide what they're gonna do. Do they try to kill Zargon? Do they seal him away forever? Or, do they just flee and loot Cynidicea and leave it to its fate, right? It's one of the greatest things about this module because, this is where your players come in. This is where the Lost City stops being a normal dungeon crawl and really turns into a mythic high-stakes battle for the soul of a lost civilization. It puts the outcome, it puts the welfare of this lost city in the player's hands. See, unlike most early D&D modules, the Lost City doesn't start with a traditional hook. There's no quest giver. There's no town with rumors. Instead, the players start desperate. So their caravan has been lost to the desert, swallowed by this raging sandstorm. And, they're in the desert. The sun is merciless. Their water is running out. And they really have nowhere to go. But then on the horizon, they see it. A ruined city half buried in the dunes. Their salvation, right? And at its center, what do they find? A giant step pyramid. The city is completely in ruins, but there's this colossal step pyramid, ancient and foreboding, but truly their only chance left at survival. There is no other option available to them. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing else that they can do. They must go inside. They have to enter the step pyramid to try to find water or food or help, but not because they're treasure hunting, right? Like, they're not looking for glory. They're looking to survive. This forces them into a mindset of exploration. So your players have to go deeper. They have to push forward. They really have no choice. Look, the setup for the Lost City is one of the best adventure openings in classic D&D because it does three crucial things, right? Number one, it throws your players into an immediate survival scenario. There's no turning back. There's no supplies, no town to retreat to. They have to go forward or they'll die. Number two, it builds tension and mystery before even the first encounter, right? The city isn't just another dungeon. It's a lost civilization buried in sand with forgotten gods, and ancient horrors lurking within. Although your players aren't aware yet, they will be. And then finally, number 3, it puts your players into an exploratory mindset. So there's no quest giver. They have to decide what to do with basic survival as their main goal, right? This opening places your players at a crossroads of fate, one where every choice they make from here on out will basically shape the rest of the adventure. They didn't come here seeking treasure. They came here to survive. And really, you, as the DM, and the Lost City, right, are about to test whether they can. So unlike more linear modules, the Lost City is a sandbox with structure, right? The step pyramid at the heart of the adventure is an introduction to the larger mysteries of the Cynidician civilization. But it's only the first piece of a much greater puzzle. Once your party gets involved with the underground factions, right, like the story can expand into something much, much bigger. It potentially evolving into an entire campaign about restoring a lost kingdom or toppling a monstrous cult, or, just surviving and ruling in a ruined civilization. Because of this, the best advice I can give before you even start running this module is to really decide how much of the adventure you want to use, right? And what I mean is, do you want to stick with a classic dungeon crawl, or do you want to develop the underground city into a fully realized setting? Because you can, right? You can literally make this a year-long campaign. One of the most interesting parts of the Lost City is its deep lore. And the module gives you 2 key tools, really, to introduce it, right? The DM's background explains the fall of Cynidecia, the monsters being known as Zargon, and the rise of the city's, strange masked inhabitants, right? That sort of, that hippie commune that they have going on down there. And the player's background, it really sets up the adventure for them, right? So they're not privy to all of the secrets in the beginning. They just know that their caravan disappeared and they need to survive. It's this dual approach. It works because it allows players to uncover the world piece by piece rather than being spoon-fed information. They start knowing only that they're lost in the desert, and then they stumble upon a ruined city. But as they delve deeper into the pyramid and they start to interact with its factions, they begin to piece together, what happened to Cynidicea, right? The big takeaway here is don't overwhelm your players with lore at the start, right? This is a module about exploration and discovery, so let your players learn about Cynidicea naturally through their interactions with its crumbling remains and its bizarre masked survivors, right? They're going to pick up information from the Cynidicians. At its core, the Lost City is a tiered dungeon crawl with layers of intrigue and survival elements, but unlike most classic dungeons, this adventure doesn't really have an obvious endpoint. It certainly has an obvious beginning point, but it doesn't have an obvious endpoint. And so, okay, what do I mean by that? Here's what's provided in the module, right? So tiers 1 and 2, so dungeon level 1, are the uppermost layers of the pyramid. It introduces the players to the basic dangers of the ruins and, their first encounters with the Cynidicians, the what's left of the Cynidicians, right? Tiers 3 and 4 are dungeon level 2, right? The deeper layers of the pyramid where the 3 factions of Cynidicea hold their strongholds. This is where the adventure begins to split from explore and survive to political intrigue, right? And then tier 5, which would be dungeon level 3, right? The deepest part of the pyramid. This features more complex encounters, so they'll start coming across undead threats, and really the first hints of Zargon's influence. And finally, the lower levels and the underground city, which is where the adventure breaks open into a full campaign. You as a DM are encouraged to expand on the hidden underground city beneath the pyramid, detailing a world of strange, drug-addled inhabitants, forgotten secrets, and the monstrous cult of Zargon. So this structure means the module can function in multiple ways depending on your preference as a DM. You could run a single session dungeon crawl. I mean, if you just want a one-shot or a short dungeon adventure, you can run the upper levels of the pyramid and just call it a day, right? You're done. The party either dies of thirst in the ruins or, finds a way to escape, right? But you're going to run it really as just a one-shot. Or you could run a mini campaign. So if you want something more expansive, right, you can begin to introduce the three factions, the Hidden City and the greater conflict with Zargon. And this can easily turn into a sandbox where, your players will choose their own path. Maybe they side with one of the factions. Maybe they try to rebuild the city. Or, as players do, maybe they just loot what they can and they escape. But finally, and I think the most interesting option, and the one that I really love to run, you could easily turn this into a full campaign. I mean, if you really want to go all in, the Lost City provides everything you need for a long-running game set in a ruined civilization. The underground city can be developed into a fully realized setting, and the conflict between Zargon and the factions, that can become an epic player-driven narrative. As a DM, you can decide how far to take it. The Lost City is not a plug-and-play linear dungeon, right? It's a foundation for a unique adventure that will unfold based on your players' decisions. So the module itself is designed for 6 to 10 players at levels 1 to 3, right? But we all know that most modern groups tend to be smaller than that, right? So if you're running it for 3 to 5 players, you're going to need to make some tweaks. So just introduce some NPC retainers. The Lost Desert Caravan makes for a perfect excuse to have NPCs tag along. You can give the players a guide, a mercenary, or even a Cynidician ally to kind of help balance the odds, right? Or just, reduce the number of enemies. It keeps fights manageable without, making them trivial. It's not hard, right? And always... And this is for any module, right? But especially in B4, try to make resting and resupply a challenge, but not impossible. The biggest threat in the Lost City isn't the monsters. It's starvation and dehydration, at least at the upper levels. If you're running a smaller party, consider placing some extra food and water caches throughout the dungeon, right? And finally, right, one of the best pieces of advice is don't move the action too quickly. The Lost City isn't meant to be rushed. Let your players rest, let them regroup, and let them explore at their own pace. This is meant to be campaign play, right? A key part of old school play is emergent storytelling, where the world reacts to the players rather than following some strict script, right? Like, if your players spend a few sessions negotiating with the factions rather than fighting, that's a great thing. You embrace that, right? Let them dig into the lore. Let them get involved in faction politics. Let them shape the world around them. Let them become deeply involved in the story as they go deeper and deeper into the pyramid, which brings us to, the upper tiers of the pyramid. So the first dungeon level of the Lost City plunges your players into survival mode, right? It strips them of the comforts that are typically afforded in most adventure modules, right? There's no friendly inn, there's no supply depot, and certainly no town to retreat to. Instead, your players are starving, they're dehydrated, they're exhausted, right? Forced to scavenge for whatever meager resources that they can find, within this step pyramid. This is what makes the Lost City unique compared to other early TSR adventures, right? The pyramid itself is a challenge to overcome. Players aren't just fighting creatures. They're fighting their own diminishing stamina. They're fighting their increasing thirst and, their creeping desperation. As a dungeon master, it's crucial for you to keep this tension alive, ramp it up, constantly remind your players of their exhaustion, their parched throats, and the gnawing hunger in their bellies, right? This module works best when the dungeon itself feels like an enemy. It shouldn't be an ordinary dungeon. There's no torches lining the walls, no frescoes telling some grand story, right? No signs of the usual traps set by intelligent guardians. Instead, everything here at the upper levels is bare stone. It's smooth and ancient, untouched by time except where, nature and maybe a few monsters have taken their toll. Overall, though, the pyramid is dark, it's silent, the pyramid is ominous. Doors are these massive stone slabs that must be pushed inward to open, right? And then they often sealing shut behind the players unless they, spike them or jam them open somehow, right? The ceilings are 10 feet high in corridors and 15 feet high in most rooms, making the place feel vast, but also claustrophobic. Most rooms are bare, save for the occasional statue, carving, or sign of past use, right? The pyramid is as much a tomb as it is a fortress, and that weight should settle over the players from the moment they step inside, right? Like, describe to them the stale, unmoving air inside the chamber, the way their footsteps echo farther than they should, right? That sensation of stepping into a place where nothing has lived for centuries. This first room, when they first enter, they find the secret door to the step pyramid and they enter. It's more than just an entrance. It's a threshold between the world of the living and the world of Cynidicia's decay. The players might not realize it yet, but by entering, they have crossed into something far greater than a mere dungeon. And, you really want to prepare them for what's next. Because the second tier of the pyramid is where the adventure truly begins. The moment players start moving through these chambers, they'll encounter their first real threats, both from monsters and, still from the environment itself. I mean, tiers 1 and 2 aren't the hardest part of the pyramid. But to be honest, they should be the most psychologically taxing, right? The deeper your players go, the less familiar the world becomes, the more strange and outlandish the world becomes. They'll encounter Cynidicians, lost in delusions, speaking of a city that no longer exists, and they're going to be talking to people who aren't there. These drugged out, addled, nightmarish hippies, right? Your players are going to realize the pyramid isn't empty. It's filled with things that have adapted to the darkness. Things that are waiting for prey to stumble inside, right? Like, they're going to start to feel the claustrophobia of the pyramid's shifting doors. That unshakable paranoia that, they're being watched, right? Like, play that up. More than anything, this part of the module, it's about survival, but not against monsters, against the very nature of Cynidicea itself, right? A civilization that refused to die and now exists in a dream state, caught between the past and really a nightmare of its own making, right? For your players, this is only the beginning. The real horror, the true horror, lurks below. So look, if the first two tiers of the Lost City introduce players to the desolation and desperation of their situation, then tiers 3 and 4 are where the adventure truly starts to unfold, right? This level of the pyramid is a turning point in the module. It's where your players move from pure survival mode into the political and supernatural conflicts that really define B4, right? That make B4 what it is. This is also where the pyramid stops being, just a dungeon and becomes something richer. Tiers 3 and 4 hold the last remnants of Cynidician civilization. The factions vying for control of the Lost City, and really the buried legacy of its once great rulers, right? If you want your players to feel like they're stepping into something bigger than just a tomb, this is the level where that feeling, right? That feeling that it is something larger should hit hardest. Right? Because Unlike the upper tiers, Tier 3 isn't just filled with wandering creatures and ancient ruins. Tier 3, this level, it's inhabited. And here your players will find the headquarters of the three factions of Cynidicea, the remnants of Cynidicea, what's left that haven't lost their minds, right? So again, the Brotherhood of Gorm, warriors of law and order, rigid in their beliefs, right? The Magi of Usamigaras, the scholars and spellcasters devoted to magic and trickery, and the Warrior Maidens of Madarua, the fierce fighters seeking to restore balance, right? This is your player's best chance to find allies, or make powerful enemies, right? Like, these factions definitely don't get along, and their feuds run deep. The moment your players make contact with one group, they're going to be scrutinized and judged. Their interactions here will determine whether they're seen as potential recruits, unwelcome outsiders, or spies for a rival faction. So for you as the DM, this is the perfect place to build tension and intrigue. I mean, the factions can be played as simple NPC quest givers, for sure, but I think that's a mistake. I think they shine brightest when they're treated as competing ideologies with their own goals, their own histories, and their own grudges. So rooms 14 through 16 will basically be the stronghold of the Magi of Usamigaras, right? So the Magi's domain is one of the most thematically rich parts of the pyramid, right? Their corridors are painted black with tiny white stars evoking like a night sky, right? Their shrine to Usamigaras is lit with strange blue flames, and every detail of their headquarters makes them feel mysterious and otherworldly. Your players are likely going to meet Origa Cirkinos, right? The chief mage. A charismatic, outwardly friendly man who hides a ruthless streak beneath his jovial demeanor, right? Unlike the Brotherhood or the Warrior Maidens, the Magi thrive on deception and manipulation. If the players don't immediately align with them, Origa will likely try to manipulate them into, doing his bidding. This is an excellent opportunity for role-playing. Like, for you and for the players. Do the players trust the Magi, or do they see through their polished exterior, right? If they join the Magi, they're going to be initiated with a burned-in star mark on their palm. And if they refuse this mark, they're going to find themselves targets of the Magi's scheming. So then, rooms 21 through 23 are going to be the Warrior Maidens of Madarua. The Warrior Maiden Shrine is a stark contrast to the Magi, right? Their quarters are austere, clean, and militant, right? Like the Shrine to Madarua burns constant candles and incense, reinforcing the devotion and discipline of this faction, right? The players are likely going to meet Pandora, the leader of the Maidens, who is both a warrior and a strategist. She outwardly believes in solving problems with swift action, right? But in truth, she carefully assesses every situation before committing her forces. So where the Magi may try to manipulate the players, the Warrior Maidens are going to test them, right? Their initiation involves bloodletting and an oath, and only women can become full members, which is a restriction that might create tension, depending on your party's composition, right? So if your players align with the Maidens, they gain fierce allies who are going to fight alongside them against the forces of Zargon. But if they side with a rival faction, they might find themselves facing Pandora's blade, which, trust me, is not a position that they want to be in. And then finally, rooms 24 and 24A are the stronghold of the Brotherhood of Gorm, right? The Brotherhood is the most rigid and disciplined of the factions, for sure. Their initiation it's almost religious in nature, involving a sacred oath before an altar to Gorm, right? Their warriors are strong, they're loyal, and they're unwavering, but they're also the least flexible of the factions, right? A key role-playing moment in this section is the door to their ceremonial chambers, which shocks anyone who touches it without saying the words, "By the great god Gorm." This small detail reinforces the Brotherhood's strict adherence to tradition and law. That's the trait that defines really every interaction with them. Joining the Brotherhood means embracing law, order, and absolute loyalty. And for some players, this is going to be an appealing structure, but for most players, it's going to feel stifling and restrictive, right? Which brings us to Tier 4, the Tombs of the Ancients. So if Tier 3 is about living factions and political intrigue, Tier 4 is where the dead hold sway, right? This level contains the burial chambers of King Alexander, Queen Zenobia, and, other nobles of Cynidicea, the old Cynidician civilization. So these tombs are haunted, trapped, and filled with the remnants of a once glorious kingdom. With some of the major encounters in Tier 4, including the ghostly warnings in room 25A. So the spirits of King Alexander and Queen Zenobia appear before your party, warning them that only death awaits them below. This is a classic old school D&D warning. It's one that your players can heed, but, they're probably going to ignore it, right? And then the false tomb in room 33, which is an elaborate fake burial chamber filled with counterfeit treasure meant to, deceive grave robbers, right? This is a trap of arrogance. It's meant to punish players who assume that, they've found the mother lode, right? And of course, Queen Zenobia's white in room 32. So if your players open her sarcophagus, they're going to face a deadly white who, drains levels, right? If they are prepared, this is a moment where old school D&D caution is key, right? Charging in recklessly is going to cost them dearly. And finally, there's King Alexander's Banshee in room 34. A Banshee in room 34 wails, dealing automatic damage, forcing players to flee or find a way to silence it, right? This is a battle of endurance. It is testing how well the party manages their resources after, so many prior encounters. So really, by the time the players leave Tier 4, they should feel like they're no longer just lost adventurers in the ruins of Cynidicea. They're now part of the Lost City story, right? They've now seen its fading factions, its corrupted nobility, and, its monstrous guardians. They know that something greater lies below. They know that a force older than the pyramid itself lies below. And the choice, right? The choice is now theirs. Do they continue downward into the forgotten depths, or do they turn back? Knowing that what waits below may consume them forever, do they continue downward, or do they just abandon the lost city? It's up to them, right? And that brings us to Tier 5, the threshold of darkness, right? Like this tier is truly the threshold of darkness. So as the party descends into Tier 5, they're stepping into the final frontier of the pyramid, the deepest and darkest reaches before the lost city itself, right? Unlike the previous levels, which balance faction intrigue and ancient history, this tier is more dangerous, more unpredictable, and far more sinister. By now, the players should be feeling the weight of the journey that they've taken, right? They've encountered the feuding remnants of Cynidicea society. They've battled their way through crumbling tombs. They've witnessed the last echoes of a once mighty civilization. But Tier 5 is different. This is another transition point, a place filled with both terrifying creatures and tantalizing clues about what lies even further below, right? This is where you remind your players that survival isn't guaranteed. The encounters here are varied and strange, and the choices that your party makes are going to determine whether they are truly ready to descend further. This level of the Lost City is where things start to shift from a survival dungeon crawl to something deeper and more dangerous. Well, players are no longer just scavenging for supplies. They're dealing with infiltration, deception, and supernatural forces that, change the way the game is played. The ogres set the stage with their comedic but deadly encounter, right? And then the doppelgangers take things to the next level with psychological horror. And then the polymar keeps players on edge by challenging their assumptions. And Demetrius's possession introduces a compelling role-playing hook with real consequences. And then finally the were-rats hint at bigger dangers, beyond the pyramid, right? By the time your players finish tier 5, they're going to realize they're in far deeper than just some old ruins, right? This is the beginning of something far stranger, far deadlier, and far more legendary. If your players have survived the upper levels of the Lost City, they've already seen how deep the rabbit hole goes, right? But the adventure doesn't have to just end at the step pyramid. The true horrors of Cynidicea are waiting far below, buried in darkness, twisted by cultic madness, and guarded by things that, honestly should never have been awakened. At this point, the game shifts from survival and exploration to something much darker, something you create. The deeper tiers of the pyramid and the underground city hold the remnants of a lost civilization, ancient secrets that might never have been meant for mortal eyes. And at the bottom of it all, Zargon, the creeping god thing that whispers madness into the hearts of its followers. This is where you, as the DM, get to take full creative control, right? Using the bones of the module as a foundation for something much, much larger. The D&D expert rules will be helpful, right? But more than anything, this is where you, as the DM, bring the world of Cynidicea to life. This is where you can expand on the pyramid, go deeper. The original pyramid was never meant to be this large, right? The lower levels were dug out by generations of slaves, carving a series of chambers, meant to depict the Cynidician afterlife. Each room was supposed to illustrate a different stage of the soul's journey after death. A final resting place full of art, philosophy, and eternal peace, right? Like, think Egyptian pyramids. But that was before Zargon was found, right? Like that was when Cynidicea was at its height. Now, the deeper levels are twisted reflections of what they were meant to be. The slaves who built these chambers, they never saw them completed. The priests who once honored the dead now feed them to their god, right? The paintings meant to depict paradise were never finished. The last mural was never painted because the final stage of the journey became Zargon's lair, right? Like, Cynidicians don't go this deep. Even the priests of Zargon fear the darkness below, though, they make their way downward when Zargon demands it. But most Cynidicians found here are sacrifices, right? Wretched, half dead, or just lost in the dark corridors. They're here to feed a god, right? The wandering monsters on these levels should be more than just obstacles. They should be manifestations of the city's corruption. The further down your players go, the less the pyramid feels like a structure, and it's more like a living tomb. These levels are not for the faint of heart. So if you expand the adventure, be aware that these encounters are not just about combat. They should create a sense of foreboding, right? So here are a few core elements to make sure the deeper pyramid feels truly deadly, truly worthy, right? So food and water are even scarcer than before, right? By now, survival is as much a concern as monsters. Light sources are absolutely crucial. The deeper levels are filled with magical darkness, flickering blue phosphorescence, and unnatural gloom, right? So, like, if your players run out of torches or spells, they're in serious trouble if they're down below, right? Like, and madness is starting to set in. The longer your party stays, the more they feel the pull of Zargon's influence, right? Have them roll wisdom checks at time to resist strange visions, paranoid thoughts, or even hallucinations of the past. The traps are deadlier. The tomb builders never meant for these corridors to be walked by the living. So hidden pits, shifting walls, and cursed doorways, they should make your party's exploration treacherous, right? I mean, this is the heart of the nightmare. This is the place where Cynidicia's madness began. This was supposed to be the final step on the soul's journey, right? A paradise carved in stone, a tribute to the gods. But instead, it became a tomb for a monster, a god. Zargon is a force of entropy, an ancient evil that has devoured the very concept of hope. The priests of Zargon sacrifice victims here, right? Feeding their god not just flesh, but sanity, right? Like, Zargon should be more than just a combat encounter. He is a god, a nightmare made flesh, and your party should feel that, right? The players should feel powerless. Give them clues about how past heroes have failed to stop him, how the Cynidicians tried and failed to stop him. The lair should feel alien, flesh-like tunnels, pulsing walls, and that constant low whisper in the players' minds, that constant tug of insanity. Zargon should not be beaten easily. The players might need to find an ancient relic or a forgotten ritual, or even turn all three factions against him. This isn't just the final battle. This is the ultimate test of whether the players can escape Cynidicia's madness intact. And, if they fail, this is where they become part of Cynidicia's legend, right? That's awesome. So what is my final verdict? Is Dungeon Module B4, The Lost City, worth playing today? Hell yes. Absolutely, without question, everyone should play through B4 at least once, if not multiple times. B4, The Lost City, stands as one of the most engaging and flexible adventures from the early days of Dungeons & Dragons. And it holds up remarkably well in modern OSR play, right? It strikes a perfect balance between classic dungeon crawl mechanics, faction intrigue, and surreal pulp fantasy horror, offering something for every type of player, right? Every type of player can draw something from B4. At its core, The Lost City isn't just about looting a dungeon. It's about survival, mystery, and power struggles. The adventure starts with a desperate search for food and water, and then slowly pulls players into the strange dreamlike underworld of Cynidicea, where nothing is quite what it seems. And the further they go, the weirder it gets, culminating in a battle against Zargon, a monstrous eldritch entity that has corrupted an entire civilization. This module works whether you want a tight, self-contained dungeon crawl or a sprawling campaign setting. If you run it straight from the book, you get a challenging pyramid crawl full of deadly encounters, cryptic factions, and classic dungeon hazards. But if you expand on it, the Lost City can become something much greater, a post-apocalyptic underground city teeming with intrigue, cultists, and secrets waiting to be uncovered. The real magic of this adventure comes from that sandbox nature. Unlike more linear modules of the era, The Lost City allows players to choose their own path, shifting between exploration, combat, role-playing, and survival elements, at their own pace. The three major factions, the Brotherhood of Gorm, the Magi of Usamigaras, and the Warrior Maidens of Madarua, they offer built-in allies or enemies and moral dilemmas, while the ever-present threat of Zargon and his cult ensures that the stakes feel high no matter how the players engage with the world, right? Its strong sword and sorcery vibes make it feel like something straight out of a Lost Weird Tales story, right? The Cynidicians with their masks, hallucinations, and strange customs create a setting that feels completely unique among classic modules. It's one part Howard's Conan and one part Lovecraftian nightmare and one part pure D&D weirdness, right? For OSR fans, The Lost City is a must-play. It rewards player ingenuity, caution, and creativity, rather than just stats and combat prowess. It forces adventurers to adapt to a dying world full of dangerous secrets while letting the DM weave as much or as little into it as they want. If you're looking for an old school dungeon crawl that can turn into a full-blown campaign, this is one of the best sandboxes ever written. And it's a reminder of why classic D&D is still so damn fun, right? But I want to know what you think. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think of Dungeon Module B4. Do you own it? Have you played through it? Have you run it? What did you think? Let me know in the comments below. Really, I want to talk about this one. I love Tom Moldvay. I love this module. I really want to talk about this one. And hey, if you don't own it, great news. You can grab a copy of Dungeon Module B4 in print or PDF at DriveThruRPG. I've dropped a link in the description and in the pinned comment where you can pick up your own copy of Dungeon Module B4 Lost City. If you're interested in running it, which you should be. You should be interested in running this module. You're not going to regret it, I promise you. Okay, that's going to do it for today's Stat Rollers. If you enjoyed this review, hit that like button, subscribe for more TTRPG content. I've got quite a few reviews coming, covering a wide variety of classic, OSR, and indie adventures coming, including more classic TSR modules. And remember to drop a comment letting me know what you think of Dungeon Module B4 The Lost City. Really, I'm serious. Let's talk about it. This module deserves to be talked about. It's phenomenal. It's one of my favorites of all time. So until next time, grab your dice, steady your torch, and tread carefully. The halls of the Lost Pyramid are filled with peril, and the watchful eye of Zargon is never far. And as always, may the dice roll ever in your favor.